This is the Roots and All podcast, here to help you get growing. Join us as we explore everything plant-related, both indoors and out, and provide the information you need to create your perfect green environment. Presented by Sarah Wilson.
Hi, and welcome to the Roots and All podcast. This week, I'm talking to a legend in the world of trees, Peter Thurman. Peter's CV reads like a bit of a tongue twister, so bear with me. He's a landscape designer and plantsman and holds chartered status in arboriculture, horticulture, forestry and the environment. He's a fellow of the Arboricultural Association and the Chartered Institute of Horticulture. He's an external examiner for the Kew diploma course and has lectured at the London College of Garden Design since its inception, mainly on planting design, but he also covers numerous other subjects such as soil science, pests, diseases and planting. Peter is interested in all types of plants, from trees and shrubs right through to bulbs and ferns. For a number of years, he taught at the Inchbourne School of Design, Meristwood College, Greenwich University and the University of Brighton. He works throughout the UK and he's completed commissions in Japan, Dubai, Finland, France, Spain, Germany and especially Italy. Although he's based in East Sussex, he now lives and works in Italy as much as possible. And I've seen pictures of his place over there and I don't blame him. And here's the interview. Thank you, Peter, for joining me on the podcast. The first question I've got is, when is the best time of year to buy and plant a tree?
There's lots of options, I have to say. Essentially, you could actually plant a tree all year round. It depends on what sort of tree it is. It depends on the root type that you're going to buy. So, for example, very reasonably priced trees are going to be available in the dormant season, and they're going to be field grown, and they'll be lifted in about November and available through to about February, March. And they're the cheapest type of trees, grown in the field and lifted, what we call bare-rooted. And the range then can increase. If you buy larger trees, those bare-rooted trees might be balled up with a root ball, a ball of soil wrapped up in Hessian, and they're going to be available for slightly longer, maybe through to April. But the main way these days, especially through garden centres, is either containerised, that's the latter two, put in a container and sold all year round, once potted up and rooted, or you can now buy container-grown trees, which are available, 24/7. There's only two times when you shouldn't plant or can't plant, and that's when the soil conditions aren't right. And that would normally be when there's a drought, like at the moment, and the ground is rock hard and care might be difficult, or if the ground is frozen in the winter. And again, it's just a question of you can't excavate. Mm-hmm. But, things have moved on since the last century or the century before, and the range of trees and the type of root systems are pretty good.
You did actually touch on something there that I don't think I've put down as a question later on. When you buy something that is field grown and it comes wrapped in Hessian, when you plant that, should you take that Hessian off?
That's a really good question. First of all, the Europeans do it slightly different to us. Very often you could buy a bare root young birch, but when you get to bigger birch trees, they're going to be root balled. So the problem with root balled trees is that if you don't look after them before planting, they can dry out. And the bigger the tree, the bigger chance, the greater the chance there is of doing that. So you can buy a root ball tree and you can plant that. And ideally, yes, you leave the Hessian on because that's biodegradable. If you take it off, the soil could fall away. However, the European nurseries, lots of British nurseries buy from European nurseries. They tend to use galvanised wire, especially around the top. And if you don't take that off, then there's a risk. Well, it doesn't rust. So basically that mesh that holds the Hessian around the root ball, that mesh will not rust and degrade. Whereas quite a lot of British nurseries do use non-galvanised wire, and that can rust. It's a good question to ask, where does the tree come from? I mean, most garden centres and even most British wholesale nurseries are buying, and I don't think Brexit will change, buying from Italy, Germany, Belgium and Holland. So a lot of our stock comes from there, and they do things slightly differently.
So when I'm shopping for a tree, should I aim to buy as big a specimen as I can afford?
My simple answer to that is absolutely not. Tony Kirkham, who runs the gardens at Kew, and he's a good friend of mine, he plants as small as possible, and therefore ideally not staking. The smaller the tree, the quicker it's going to establish. The younger the tree, it's quicker it's going to establish. Now, Kew is an enclosed, policed place. Now, some people may have gardens, front gardens, where if you plant small, there's a risk of the stuff getting nicked. So that needs to be thought about. And of course, local authorities planting street trees, they need to be fairly vandal-proof. But for private domestic gardens, I would say plant as young as possible. Something possibly as little as 1 metre in height. And what will happen is that tree will establish quickly. And let's say you're going to plant a metre-high oak tree. If you plant another oak which is 3 metres high and much more expensive, then actually the 1 metre oak will probably catch up with it and overtake because it gets going, whereas the big tree, the more mature tree, will just sit there. It's a false economy, but it depends, as you know, on the patience of the tree owner. And, they do grow quickly, a lot quickly, more quickly than people think, but some people want instant impact.
So when I'm digging a hole for the tree,
Yep.
Is there a kind of rule of thumb about how big and deep it should be? And also, I have heard a rumour that maybe a round hole is not the best idea.
Yeah. There's no scientific proof, but certainly, again, Kew and Edinburgh Botanic Gardens have come to the conclusion that a square hole is better than a round hole. The idea of that is that the tree roots get into the 4 corners of the square hole where there's often a fissure, a crack or an opening, and that gets the roots out and into the soil and what they call into independence. With a round hole, there's a risk that the roots will actually start to go round and round, which they might do in a pot, and so girdle themselves. As far as the size is concerned, I was taught at college many, many years ago that you dig a 50p hole for a threepenny bit root system. And so the wider the better. The larger hole you can make, the better. I know some people are going to be restricted, but the wider the hole, the better it will be. As far as depth is concerned, that is really crucial. And a lot of people dig their holes far too deeply. You should only dig the hole as deep as the root system. If you dig it deeper and you disturb the soil underneath, you're going to have to backfill. But what then can happen is that soil will settle, and then all of a sudden the tree is too deep in the ground. And that means the stem of the tree is underground and under soil, and then that can rot. It's one of the biggest killers of trees in Britain is the sinking of the tree and therefore the sinking of the stem and then it rotting.
So I've dug my hole for my tree and it's rained, as it is today, and I've noticed there's a lot of water standing in the hole that I've dug. Is that going to be a problem for the new tree?
It's not a good sign, I have to say, and that will normally occur if the soil is heavy clay or just clay even. And when you've dug your hole, you've smeared the bottom and the sides, so what you've actually created is a sealed bowl, so the water can't escape. So in a heavy clay soil, first of all, you need to make sure that you fork the sides and the base of the hole. That's good anyway to do in any type of soil, even if it's just silty. But then also with clay, I would strongly recommend that what you've taken out of the hole, you sprinkle some gypsum on it. I've personally only discovered this over the last 4 or 5 years. It's an amazing natural chemical. Plaster of Paris is another name for it, and it breaks the clay particles up. It allows the water to separate from the clay particles, and that will really, really help. However, if you're going to plant a big tree in a heavy clay soil, you're going to need a larger hole, and if the water is sitting there, then you might be thinking about creating some drainage, such as a pipe at the bottom of the hole leading to a soakaway. So, in larger gardens, if you're planting an avenue of trees in heavy clay, you might have a drainage system that runs all the way along the avenue with soakaways along the way.
So I've dug the hole, put the tree in it. What am I going to use to fill the hole up with? Just the soil that comes out, or nice fresh bags of compost?
Right. Certainly not the latter. A lot of research on this now at the moment in America, and what they're saying is that the best thing you can put back is what you took out. That is irrelevant to what the soil type is. Just before I forget, it's not a bad idea to buy a soil testing kit, maybe from a garden centre or on the internet, just to check what your soil type is like. And there's various tests you can do with your hand, and you can Google it. But, if you can roll your soil up into a ball, then the chances are it's very clay. If it doesn't form a ball and it falls apart, then it's quite sandy. But the soil testing kit will also tell you about the pH, the acidity or alkalinity, and that's quite important to know as well, as far as tree selection is concerned. Put back what you have taken out. If it's clay, gypsum, maybe a little bit of coarse grit as well. But the research in America suggests that no more than 10% tree planting compost or compost from your compost bin.
Okay. And anything in the way of feeds?
The chances are, regardless of the sort of tree that you've planted, containerised, container-grown, root ball, bare root, the roots are going to be damaged. You need to damage the roots. If you're buying a containerised or container-grown tree, it's a good idea, despite what the magazines and the television say, you need to damage the root system. If you've got girdling of the roots, spiralling of the roots when you take the tree out of the pot, then you need to cut that. You need to damage those roots. That's one of the most important things to do. Therefore, the tree is in no fit state to take any fertiliser up. It's going to live off its sugars, its reserves in its twigs and stem for the first 2 or 3 years. If I was going to feed a tree, I would feed it in year 3.
Okay.
There are loads of other proprietary things, I can only describe them as things on the market, which are being sold, commercial products, and most of them are snake oil, and they are rubbish and a waste of time. And that includes some products that are endorsed by fairly important organisations in Britain, sadly. But the main one that I have very great misgivings about are mycorrhizal inoculants. Mycorrhizal is an important thing in the wild. It's completely vital to trees in the wild, but you can't buy a packet of it and expect it to work with a tree that you're going to plant in a garden. It's a load of rubbish. There are other things that are also now considered to be a waste of money, things like seaweed extract, etc. But there is some research that suggests, and I suggest your listeners Google biochar, which is basically heavily burnt charcoal, which is a soil sweetener. There's a new product out called Rigel G, which is proving very good in trials. And also, don't laugh, but Tate and Lyle, sugar. When you think about it, it's sucrose. And sugar is a good feeder, but I would still not do that until year 3.
Okay. I think that's what Glyn Percival's been looking into, isn't it?
Yeah.
The sugar thing.
Reading University.
Yeah. So, okay, well, that's really, really brilliant to know, I think, in terms of saving money, if nothing else. I wonder if you could talk about clay, soil, and the idea of putting a layer of grit down in the planting hole before you put the tree on it. Is that something you should do?
It's all going to help. Yeah, right. Coarse grit, sharp grit is, and what I would do is actually mix that with the clay before you put it back in the soil. There's another important thing with clay is if you're going to try and plant when the clay is dry, that's going to be very difficult because it's going to form blocks. And if it's really, really wet, it's going to be very claggy and it's going to be difficult to use that as a backfill and to firm it properly. So timing is important, not too wet, not too dry. But a coarse grit is great. And also possibly as a layer in the bottom, especially if it's involved with a drainage system like I mentioned.
Mm-hmm. So once we've planted the tree and filled the hole, should we then water it? And should we water it even if it's raining out? I mean, is that a daft idea?
If I was going to plant a bare root plant, if I'd left it overnight, preferably in a polythene bag in a shed, I'd probably still dunk that in a water